in this section, I'm going to talk about when you're doing your initial assessment. On the board I showed you guys, there's 3 things that need to happen for our brain to develop. Number 1 is stimulation, the appropriate developmental sequence, which is what we're going to go into in the rehab section. I have it all laid out for you guys. But we also need oxygen, and we also need ATP or energy. And I want to show you guys how we can easily assess those things. So number 1 is looking at their oxygen saturation. So how I do it in the office is really easy. You can do multiple different ways, but I'll just get a pulse ox. You can get them really cheap off of Amazon. During COVID, everyone had them to check their oxygen saturation. But what you do is you put a pulse ox on, and the first number is their actual pulse rate, so the amount, the rate of their heart. And then the second one is their oxygen saturation. Technically anything, above 95, 90 or so percentage is normal, but I don't like to see it under 98. And clinically, I see over and over again when their oxygen saturation is lower than 98, their fingers are cold, their toes are cold, they're not getting good blood flow to those areas, not getting good oxygenation to those areas. So that's the first thing I look at is I want it above that. If not, during rehab and therapy, what you can actually do is supplement with oxygen. You can get an oxygen concentrator for like a couple $100 off Amazon. But I like to have that on during rehab too, simply because when you start stressing out their system, what you'll see first is when you're hitting fatigability is you will see their oxygen drop and you'll see their heart rate jump up. And that means their system's getting fatigued. They're using more oxygen than they can keep up with. And the reason why that is it could just be a blood flow issue. Like, for example, they don't have good blood flow because they don't exercise enough. First and foremost. So if their toes are cold and their fingers are cold, they have a blood flow issue. They're not getting enough blood flow. And a supplement you can actually take to help with this is something called nitric balance. It's through a company called Apex Energetics, which helps a ton. I'll actually put a link to it in the course. I'll put a link with that along with all my other favorite supplementation recommendations. But the other thing that you can look at is there's something called a capillary refill test. So what you do is you squeeze their fingernail at the tip of their fingers. You squeeze their fingers and you watch for it to refill. It should refill in just a few seconds, but sometimes it'll take 10 seconds, 15 seconds. They're not getting good blood flow to their extremities, which means they're also not getting good blood flow to the tip of their brain. And they'll typically have attentional issues or bedwetting issues at night or something along those lines when they don't have good blood flow. Really important when this is going on is to run basic labs and make sure they do not have anemia. Anemia is another major reason, and a very common reason for this is because when you're anemic, you can't transport oxygen efficiently. Your red blood cells aren't functioning well enough to carry that oxygen, and that's why it's a big deal. So running basic CBC in labs and just making sure that the child's not anemic is extremely helpful. And that could be iron deficiency anemia, B12 deficiency anemia, vitamin C deficiency anemia. There's multiple different types, so don't just look at iron because iron is just one reason for that. And then the other aspect that we need to talk about is ATP or energy production. ATP stands for adenose triphosphate. And what happens is, let me zoom in here, is we have a Krebs cycle that runs. And as that Krebs cycle runs, there's a bunch of different aspects of it. You can see it right up here. This is a test that we're going to look at right here. This is called a urinary organic acids test. And what we see is what the Krebs cycle running efficiently. Then what happens is we spit out something called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA goes into our electron transport chain, and it produces ATP or energy. Well, if we look at these markers down here, these are mitochondrial Krebs cycle markers. So we can see how, if we have enough, how that Krebs cycle is running. If these numbers are really low or really high, it simply means that we're not efficiently getting through that Krebs cycle. And therefore, we're not going to spit out enough ATP or have energy. So if a kid's fatiguing out constantly, this can start telling us why. And there might be a lot of underlying reasons. Like, for example, when we look at this one, candida or a yeast overgrowth, which is very common in developmental delays, especially autism, they have candida overgrowth in their digestive system, and it dysregulates this Krebs cycle. So they actually can't produce energy efficiently. And a lot of that comes down to our diet. So I'm going to talk a massive amount about diet here in just a second, because it is excruciatingly important. And then the last aspect of this that's also on that board is neural inflammation. I can't tell you how many kids, when we run neural zoomer tests, when we look at those tests, they have a massive amount of neural inflammation. Their brain is on fire, it is inflamed, and it directly relates, the markers that are on there directly relate to their symptoms that they have going on. If your child is fatiguing out quickly, inflammation could be, and likely is, the underlying reason for it. Because when your brain's inflamed, neurons can't make connections efficiently, and then that whole system fatigues out. So big things we need to dig into is diet, lifestyle factors, understanding the underlying cause of their lack of development. And this is where, like, if you've been working on primitive reflexes for months, for years, it's not that you're not doing enough exercises or you're not doing them appropriately. Just that amount of stimulation, if they have these other resources in place, should easily integrate those reflexes. An infant can integrate these reflexes. And their brain is typically much more developed than an infant, so it should integrate much, 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 much faster. So these are really important. First thing that I like to look at is food sensitivities, which I'm going to show you a food sensitivity panel, what that looks like, and kind of explain a little bit about the differences in an allergy versus a sensitivity and why you should have both checked. Other big thing is too many carbohydrates, not enough fat, not enough protein. And when I run urinary organic acids tests, I see this every time. Kids aren't getting enough protein. They don't have enough stomach acid because they're not eating enough protein. And they have yeast infections because they're eating way too many carbohydrates. And the reason for that is simple. This chart that came out in the 70s is absolutely wrong for our physiology. It is the worst recommendation that we can possibly give for normal human physiology. And I'm going to explain why. Humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And if I go around in Iowa, where I live, in the middle of winter, what are the foods that are available? So and let me go back. When you talk about diet, I had to talk to a parent about this the other day. When we look at a diet, you need to think of what have humans adapted to have for hundreds of thousands of years. Those adaptations do not go away in an extremely short period of time like we're seeing here. So what did they eat in Paleolithic times before we had highly processed foods, before the food industries made this chart that is ridiculous so they could make more money? In the middle of winter in Iowa, you might find some tubers, but the only thing you're finding is meat. There's no vegetables, there's no fruit, there's nothing. And that means that we need to use fat and protein as fuel sources. That's why we have something called essential fatty acids. We need fat for normal function. Essential amino acids. We need amino acids for normal function. There's no such thing as essential carbohydrates. It doesn't exist. There's entire civilizations that live without ever eating a large amount of carbohydrates. Not only that, but all of these foods on the lower, which the food pyramid says should be your staples of your diet, they're all highly processed, highly refined. And in the United States, what that means is all of these grains are sprayed with herbicides, pesticides, which when you run a total toxic burden, you'll see it. You'll see these herbicides in their system. You'll see these pesticides in their system. And they're known to be neurotoxic or toxic to our brains. They're known to be toxic to our immune system. They're known to cause cancer. They're known to disrupt our liver, our kidneys. I mean, all of these things, they're 100% known. And they're not allowed in almost any country besides ours. This is a huge point to think about. Like, for example, McDonald's fries. There's 11 ingredients in the United States in those. In Europe, there's 3. All of the other ones are banned. In Europe, they have 400 allowed chemicals. We have 10,000 allowed chemicals. All of the other ones are banned. They can't spray glyphosate all over. Like in Russia, in Germany, it's illegal to use GMO crops, and it's illegal to use glyphosate or Roundup, which is, I'm in Iowa, there's planes that just spray this stuff over all of our grains, and you cannot wash them off, number one. And if they're being processed and you're eating processed food, it's going directly into their food. Number one. Number two, when you process these foods, you directly eliminate any nutrients they have in them anyways, and then they refortify them with synthetic vitamins, which your body can't process. So this is why obesity, which is a known risk factor for developmental delays, has gone up dramatically, and autoimmunity has gone up dramatically, is because, number one, they're eating chemicals that are known to cause these things. Number two, there's no nutrients. There's a lot of calories, but no nutrients. So we are the most obese population mixed with the most malnourished population. And in the 70s, rates of obesity in kids was 5 to 10%. Now it's 50 to 60% of our kids are obese, which this is not fat shaming or anything along those lines. It is extremely unhealthy for our metabolic systems to be obese. It literally, even just adipose tissue in a male, for example, creates estrogen, which causes cancer. And also in females, high amounts of estrogen is highly associated with breast cancer. And it decreases testosterone. Testosterone in males has dropped by 50%. A lot of adults can't produce enough actual semen to have fertility, have kids, because we have such high levels of estrogen because our body fat is so high. And it's because of this chart. This is the worst thing you could possibly do for a kid. And that's the foundation of their diet. Cereals in the morning, if you look at the amount of sugar in cereals and then you add milk to it in the morning, which is what a lot of these kids are eating, there's more sugar than a pop. You wouldn't give a pop to a kid in the morning. You wouldn't give a pop to a kid in general. There's so much sugar added to this stuff and chemicals added. It's unreal. And when you look into what's actually in these foods and you look it up, it's crazy. And especially in the United States. The food that we have, processed food in the United States, is illegal in so many different countries. The chemicals that are in there are absolutely 100% illegal to use in other countries. And this is what we're giving our kids. Oh, I'm not giving my kid, but this is what a lot of people are giving kids on a daily basis, and they can't have it. What this chart should be is this meat and poultry, fish, nuts should be the foundation. It should be the staple of their diet. It's what our bodies were designed to do. Our digestive system is very similar to a wolf's, and they eat meat. And so, and not saying that we only eat meat, because I don't know that that's necessarily healthy, but we need to have the foundation being those essential nutrients, essential amino acids, essential fats. They're essential for life. They're essential for building blocks for our brain. They're essential for building blocks for muscles. They need to be they need to have a foundation. Then the next whole layer should be vegetables, because they have lots of good antioxidants. Then on top of that should be fruit. And to be honest, physiologically and how things are made, I don't give my kid gluten. I don't give my kid dairy at all, because it's not designed for our body. Cow's milk is designed to raise a cow from 60 pounds to 600 pounds in a year. It's not meant for us. We're the only animals. If you think of this, I'm going to call us an animal, but we're the only animals that drink another animal's milk after weaning. The only one. You don't see a lion going around and suckling on to get goat's milk. You don't see a dog going and suckling to get other people's milk. It doesn't happen. And it's been said that we should do these things for profit, not for health, for profit. And that's what you need to remember is the foods that are recommended on here, this food pyramid is made by the food industry. Studies backed by the food industry, not for your health, not for your kids' health, but for profit. And we have to get away from that. You have to critically think, is this something that I could have gotten 20,000 years ago? No, it's not. The only sources you're going to have in the winter in Iowa is tubers, meat. In the summer, you're going to have vegetables and a mild amount of fruit. That's it. You might get lucky and find a fruit tree, but you're not going to find anything else. It's basic. But that's the building blocks that we need as human beings to function. And making sure that it's organic, number one, because if it's not organic, it's sprayed with pesticides, it's sprayed with herbicides, and it's gonna cause dysfunction, and it's gonna trigger neural inflammation, it's gonna trigger autoimmunity, and that's why we have absolutely rampant amounts of neurological developmental issues, is because all of them are actually autoimmune related. And I'm going to show you the test, because every kid that I run that has big struggles, when I run a neural zoomer on them, they come back with some form of neurological autoimmunity, meaning they have a mass amount of neural inflammation. And we have to change these basic things if you want your kid to function well at any level. You literally have to swim upstream against everything that our society does, because our society has put all these things in place, again, not for the health of your child, but for profit. Sugar should not even be on here. You can't have it. It should not be on here. It's not meant for our body, especially in those amounts. But good fats, and that's fats from animals, olive oil, avocado oil. Those are the oils you want to give them. You have to stay away from peanut oil, canola oil, vegetable oils. They're excruciatingly inflammatory for our central nervous system. And your brain is not going to develop when you're eating or consuming those foods. Other big things that'll play into this is toxic load. So if you go to my site, limitlessfoundation.co, I have a ton of meta-analysis on these. There's tons of research on there. There's probably almost 1,500 research articles on there relating to development and rehab strategies and neural inflammation and all these mechanisms, right? So I'm not going to just put a whole bunch of sites up here because I have so many of them, but you can find them there. But one big thing is toxic stress. Toxic stress from our food, toxic stress from our environment, toxic stress from pollutants. Those are highly associated with developmental delays. So we need to limit that as much as possible. And what that means is filtering your water. Get a reverse osmosis under your sink and only drink out of that. And make sure they're drinking out of glass bottles, not plastic. Making sure that the food sources are organic. Making sure that you have air purifiers in your house to purify the air. I like putting photocatalytic oxidation systems in my HVAC to make sure that I'm killing off mold spores and viruses and bacteria that's going through there. I have a heat recovery vent for my house to make sure I'm cycling good, fresh air through my house at all times. I have dehumidifiers to make sure the humidity level in the house is staying consistent and not getting really high, because then we could produce mold. And mold is another big thing that is wildly overlooked, but constantly more research is coming out with. And then last thing for neural inflammation is there's a large body of research that shows that EMFs, especially 5G EMFs, are creating brain inflammation. And if you want to make sure, and I know we can't go without internet. I'm in a studio. I have internet right now. Make sure at night your phones are on airplane mode. Make sure your Wi-Fi router is unplugged to take that stress off as much as possible. I hope this is a good introduction to these different aspects. I'm going to break down all the labs that you can run, what they show, why they're important in the next sections. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. To learn more or to schedule an intensive or anything with my team, there's a link below. Just go ahead and click that, and that'll get you to the right spot. Have an awesome day.